Dust hit like grit in my teeth when I crested the ridge, the truck's tires crunching over cracked earth that stretched endless under a sky heavy with wind. This farm sat remote, miles from any road worth calling one, the kind of place where isolation clings like burrs to your jeans. The barn loomed first, its roof sagging bad, beams cracked from last winter's snow, threatening to collapse and bury the hay and tools inside. One wrong storm and the whole operation folds. Livestock scattered, feed ruined, the owner cut off even further. I killed the engine, the silence rushing in thick, and that's when I saw her, silhouette sharp against the fading light on the porch, arms crossed, her gaze steady and guarded, weighing me from afar like she was deciding if I'd bolt before I even started. I grabbed my toolbox, boots kicking up more dust, and headed straight for the barn. The door hung crooked, wind whistling through gaps, and I climbed the ladder quick, prying at the splintered rafters. Wood groaned under my hands, unstable, the urgency settling in my gut like a stone. This fix couldn't wait. I'd been drifting for months, taking carpentry gigs that kept me moving, chasing work quiet enough to drown out the noise in my head. Cities chewed too hard, with their stares and questions I never answered, so I stuck to back roads, fixing fences and roofs for folks who didn't pry. This farm job came through a bulletin board in some nowhere diner, remote spread needing urgent repairs, pay in cash, no strings. It sounded right, a chance to hammer out the ache from old heartbreaks, the kind that left you splintered and wary of closeness. The place felt carved from the land itself, weathered boards silvered by sun and wind, fields rolling out barren under a sky that pressed low. Dust devils spun lazy in the distance, carrying the sharp tang of dry earth and sage, while the wind tugged constant at the fences, rattling wire like a warning. Isolation wrapped it tight. No neighbors for miles, just the farm's creak and the occasional low of cattle in the corral. It was the sort of quiet that amplified everything unspoken, turning the horizon into a mirror for what you carried inside. She met me at the truck as I unloaded lumber, her nod measured, eyes dark and direct, scanning the calluses on my hands and the tools slung over my shoulder. No words at first, just that gaze, assessing if I could handle the weight of the work, or if I'd crack like the beams I came to fix. "Name's Riley," I said, extending a hand rough from saws and nails. She took it, brief, her grip firm, skin toughened by years of this life. "Mara," she replied, voice low over the wind, turning without more to lead the way. The tour started at the house, a low, ranch-style, hunkered against the ridge, porch sagging where posts had rotted through. Inside, the kitchen smelled of coffee grounds and earth. Counters scarred from use, but she kept it sparse. No photos, no clutter, just the essentials. Out back, the chicken coop stood sturdy enough, wire taut, but the wind had twisted the gate hinges loose. We moved to the corrals next, posts leaning from frost heave, and she pointed out the repairs needed there, her steps sure on the uneven ground. But the barn was the heart of it, its critical failure hitting like a punch. The main beam had split clean, under the weight of last season's hay bales, roof dipping inward, gaps letting wind howl through, and rain threaten the stored feed below. "Been holding since spring," Mara said, kicking at a loose plank, her voice edged with the strain of managing alone. "One bad gust, and it's done. Lose the shelter, the stock suffers." I nodded, running my hand along the fracture, feeling the give in the wood, the urgency knotting tighter. This wasn't just a job. It was the farm's lifeline, her solitude's thin thread. We circled the structure slow, her explaining the load paths and where the collapse started, while I sketched quick notes on a scrap, mind already mapping the fixes, new beams, bracing, shoring up before the next front blew in. Dust clung to our boots, the wind picking up as sun dipped, casting long shadows across the yard. She watched me work the numbers, that guarded gaze softening just a fraction, like she saw the focus matching her own. Evening settled heavy, the sky bruising purple, wind dropping to a whisper that carried the chill. I hauled my duffel to the cramped-out building behind the barn, a lean-to with a cot and a single bulb, walls thin against the night's drop. Tools clattered as I unpacked, saws and levels lining the rough shelf, the metallic scent mixing with the earthy damp. Mara lingered at the door a moment, silhouetted again, before nodding goodnight and heading to the house. The quiet pressed in, questions stirring about her reserve, the farm's weight on her shoulders, and what this isolation might pull from us both. Morning cracked cold, the wind already tugging at the outbuilding door as I laced my boots. The farm stirred slow, roosters cutting through the quiet, their calls sharp against the ridge. I grabbed the hammer first, its weight familiar in my palm, and headed for the barn, lumber stacked heavy under my arm. Dust swirled with each step, the earth hard-packed and unyielding, while the sky hung low, threatening more than chill. Hauling the beams took muscle, shoulders burning as I dragged them across the yard, the wood scraping gravel like a low growl. Nails bit into the grain under my swings, the thud echoing out, but the elements fought back, wind whipping sawdust into my eyes, forcing me to pause and wipe, the sting settling deep. I braced a post against the sagging frame, level steady despite the gusts, sweat already beating cold on my neck. The stakes pressed in, quick. One loose joint here, and the whole roof could shift, trapping feed or worse, injuring stock if they sought shelter. Mara's farm ran on this barn, hay for winter, tools for the fields, and with isolation this thick, no quick call for help if it gave way. I drove another nail, the vibration jolting up my arm, mind mapping the load, the way the beam would distribute weight without cracking under snow or storm. The work pulled me in, a rhythm against the wind's push, but the solitude amplified the ache, reminding me why I drifted. Jobs like this kept hands busy, heart tucked. From the corner of my eye, I caught her on the porch. Mara leaned against the rail, coffee mug steaming in her grip, that distant watch steady as the horizon. No words carried over the yard, just her silhouette framed by the house, eyes tracing my movements without a flinch. The proximity tugged unspoken, close enough to feel the farm's pulse shared, yet her reserve hung like fence wire, taut between us. I'd glance up mid-swing, hammer pausing, and find her gaze lingering, not prying, but measuring the space we kept. It built tension quiet, the wind carrying hints of her presence, earth and faint soap mixing with my sweat. Bodies separated by yards, but the air thickened, pulling questions about what lay behind that guard. By noon, the sun clawed higher, heat baking the dust into my skin. I paused at the pump for water, splashing cold over my face, the chill cutting sharp. Mara appeared then, steps measured across the yard, carrying a plate wrapped in cloth. Lunch, simple as the land. Jerky sliced thin, bread dense from her oven, cheese wrapped in wax. We sat on the porch steps, the wood creaking under us, forks scraping tin as wind rustled the fields beyond. Talk stayed sparse, skirting the edges of farm life. Cattle need moving soon, she said, eyes on the corral, voice low over the bite of jerky. Wind's shifting patterns. I nodded, chewing slow, mentioning the lumber's warp from last rain, how it'd hold if braced right. Words veiled deeper reserves, her pauses heavy, like the quiet hid currents stronger than the gusts. No dives into whys or pasts, just the rhythm of daily grind. Fences mending, stock feeding, masking the pull of isolation on her frame. Her hands drew my notice as she broke bread, fingers worn from rope and rain, calluses thick where mine mirrored from chisel and plane. They moved precise, tearing crust without waste, veins standing taut against the labor's mark. I flexed my own, nails bitten short, scars faint from splinters long-healed, seeing the echo in her grip, the shared toll of work that shaped skin and silence. It stirred something low, a recognition in the rough, the way hands like these built worlds alone. She caught me looking once, gaze meeting, brief, unflinching, before dropping to her plate. The moment hung, wind filling the gap, tension coiling tighter in the unspoken match. Afternoons blurred into the same push, saw rasping through pine, muscles throbbing as I fitted braces against the beam's groan. Mara passed by the yard more, hauling feed sacks or checking gates, her shadow crossing mine without touch. But small gestures built respect quiet, a thermos of water left on the post, steam rising like an offer. Me holding a gate while she drove nails into a loose rail, our shoulders near enough for warmth to bridge the chill. No thanks voiced, just nods, the wind carrying the weight of it. Days stacked like lumber, routine settling deep. The farm's isolation weaving us closer through labor's thread. The quiet grew familiar, evenings finding me wiping tools clean in the outbuilding, the metallic tang sharp against dusk's fade. Mara called from the porch once, voice carrying soft over the yard. "Storm's brewing tomorrow." Her warning pulled me in, the collaboration hinting at more, failures waiting in the wind's howl. The beam gave way mid-morning, a sharp crack splitting the air like dry lightning. I'd hoisted the new lumber into place, muscles straining against the weight, sweat tracing lines down my back as I secured the brace. The old fracture had hidden deeper rot, and under the pressure it splintered further, wood fibers tearing with a groan that echoed off the barn walls. Shards rained down, dust choking the light, forcing me to drop back, boots sliding on the scattered planks. My heart thudded heavy, the rework staring back, hours lost, the structure still sagging, threatening to pull the roof with it if I didn't shore it up fast. Mara heard the snap from the corral, her steps quick across the yard, boots crunching gravel. She didn't ask questions, just grabbed the end of a fallen board, her grip steady, as we dragged it clear. "Start over," she said, voice low but edged, eyes on the damage. We worked the tight space inside the barn, shadows closing in as clouds gathered overhead. I sawed fresh cuts, the blade biting slow through the grain, while she held the level, her shoulder brushing mine in the narrow aisle. The contact lingered, warmth cutting through the chill draft, calluses scraping faint like a spark on flint. She pulled back quick, but the air hummed thicker, her minimal help a thread pulling us closer, unspoken tension coiling in the dim. By afternoon, the wind picked up, gusts rattling the loose panels like bones in the eaves. I fitted the replacement beam, hammer swings measured against the howl, each thud vibrating up my arms. But the elements pushed back, dust devils swirling through the open door, blinding me mid-swing. Nails bent under the force, forcing pauses, the isolation weighing heavier now, miles from any mill or hand to call. Mara's farm hung on this fix. Lose the barn, and winter's bite turns brutal, stock huddled without shelter, her days stretching endless alone. Evening brought the wind's full roar, slamming the outbuilding walls as I wiped tools clean, the metallic tang sharp against the earth's damp rise. It amplified everything, the isolation pressing like a hand on my chest, turning the quiet into a mirror for desires I kept buried. I sat on the cot, lantern flickering low, listening to the gusts whip the ridge, carrying echoes of her footsteps fading toward the house. The brush of her shoulder replayed, rough and real, stirring wants I'd hammered down before, closeness that scared as much as it pulled. Out here, no crowds to hide in, just the wind stripping layers, forcing you to face what simmers beneath the work. My mind wandered to old breaks, heartaches hidden like knots in pine. There was the woman in the mill town, her laugh warm over sawdust, but the stares from kin drove her away, leaving me splintered, drifting to outrun the ache. Another in the foothills, hands soft against my calluses after long shifts, but whispers of scandal pulled her back to family ties, the silence after cutting deeper than any saw. I'd built walls then, jobs like this a refuge, labor filling the gaps where trust cracked. But Mara's reserve mirrored mine, guarded eyes holding storms of their own, and the isolation here tugged at those seams, desires surfacing like roots through dry soil. Wanting touch that lasted, connection that weathered the wind. The radio crackled late that night, static breaking the howl as I tuned the shortwave in the outbuilding. Weather warnings spilled out, voice urgent from the mainland, fronts building fast with rain and gale. Secure what you can, it advised, but the signal faded quick, leaving the roar to fill the quiet. I stepped to the door, wind lashing my face, and saw her lights still on in the house, a steady glow against the dark. The failures piled, beam reworked but untested, storm closing in, and it pulled us toward more, collaboration deepening as the horizon bruised. Tomorrow meant joint hands against the worst, boundaries blurring in the push. The ladder creaked under my weight as I climbed the barn side, wind tugging at my shirt like insistent fingers. Clouds stacked low, gray and heavy, turning the sky into a lid on the valley. Mara steadied the base below, her boots planted firm in the dust, hands gripping the run's low. "Higher," she called, voice cutting through the gusts, steady but laced with the day's edge. I reached the roof slant, boots scraping shingles loose, and balanced the new plank across the gap, muscles taut from the haul. The joint effort pulled us in tight, her passing the hammer up, my arm stretching down, fingers brushing hers rough and warm. The touch lingered a beat, calluses catching, heat sparking quiet against the chill draft. She didn't pull away fast, just held the gaze up at me, dark eyes unflinching in the building shadow. We worked the peak together after that, me nailing from above while she climbed halfway, handing nails one by one from the tin in her pocket. The space narrowed up there, her shoulder pressing mine when the wind shoved, bodies leaning into the shared balance. Accidental at first, a hip bump as she shifted for leverage, but the touch is built, lingering longer, her hand steadying my elbow when a gust rocked the ladder. Warmth cut through the fabric, skin to skin faint where sleeves rode up, the proximity amplifying the farm's isolation. No room for distance on that roof, just the rhythm of swings and passes, breaths sinking over the wind's whine. I drove a nail home, the thud vibrating between us, and felt her exhale close, the air thickening with what we didn't name. Afternoon wore on, sun fighting through the clouds faint, casting slants across the ridge. We paused at the eaves, me wiping sweat from my brow with the back of my hand, salt stinging my eyes. Mara sat on the lower rung, legs dangling, and the words came then, unbidden like the dust settling. "This farm's been in my family 3 generations," she said, voice low, eyes on the fields rolling barren. "Dad built the barn himself, back when the land gave more." Her fingers traced a crack in the wood, the motion slow, and I saw the hitch in her breath, the crack in her reserve. "Lost him to the wind last year. Tractor flipped in a gust down the draw. Mom followed quick after, couldn't hold it alone." The loss hung heavy, her voice breaking faint on the edge, like dry earth splitting under pressure. Isolation's weight pressed in her words, the farm's history a chain she'd shouldered solo, no one to share the load or the grief. I nodded, throat tight, the hammer heavy in my lap. Her gaze lifted then, meeting mine direct in the fading light, unflinching, the guarded edges softening just a fraction. Dust motes danced between us, wind carrying the sharp tang of pine shavings and her faint earth scent. The moment stretched, her eyes holding mine longer than the work demanded, pulling at the thread of my own buried aches. I wiped sweat again, the rag rough against my skin, and felt the pull stronger, desires stirring like roots under soil, wanting to bridge that gap, to touch the vulnerabilities she'd cracked open. But I held back, the proximity a tease, bodies close yet bound by the day's labor. Dusk settled thick as we climbed down, the ladder groaning its relief, shadows lengthening across the yard. I gathered tools scattered at the base, metal clinking soft, while Mara checked the braces one last time, her silhouette sharp against the house lights flickering on. The touches from the roof replayed, lingers that weren't accidents, warmth that cut deeper than the wind. Evening found me back in the outbuilding, lantern casting yellow pools on the cot, the air cooling fast through the thin walls. I sat, wiping the saw clean, oil slick on my palms, listening to her footsteps cross the yard. They paused at the door, gravel crunching slow, then faded toward the house, the rhythm echoing in the quiet. Questions stirred then, heavy as the approaching clouds. What kept her so guarded? That voice cracking on loss mirroring my own hidden breaks. The farm's isolation amplified it, turning the night into a space where desires press close, unspoken but alive, pulling me toward whatever the storm would force open. The wind picked up again as I lay on the cot, sheets rough against my skin, the howl rattling the door like a warning. Shortwave crackled faint in the corner, static breaking with updates on the front building fast, rain sheets and gusts that could tear loose what we'd fixed. I tuned it low, the voice urging prep, but my mind stayed on her footsteps, the fragment of history she'd shared, voice raw with the weight of alone. Failures loomed in the dark, repairs tested unyielding, leaks waiting in the seams, and the brewing storm pulled us deeper, collaboration turning to necessity, boundaries blurring as thunder grumbled distant on the ridge. Rain hit sudden that afternoon, a wall of it, slamming the barn roof like fists on tin. We'd just fitted the last shingle on the peak, my arms aching from the climb, when the sky cracked open. Water sheeted down in seconds, turning dust to mud that sucked at my boots as I scrambled inside. But the weak patch showed quick, a seam we'd overlooked in the rush, water gushing through like a burst pipe, flooding the work area below. Hay bales soaked fast, dark stains spreading across the floor, tools scattering in the rush. The structure groaned under the deluge, wind whipping sheets through the gaps, the isolation hitting harder now, no cover from the downpour's fury. I grabbed a tarp from the corner, shaking it out heavy, but the flood rose ankle deep, cold seeping through my jeans. Mara burst in behind me, door banging against the frame, her hair plastered already, shirt clinging dark. "The braces!" she shouted over the roar, eyes wide on the water pooling around the new beams. We moved frantic, adrenaline surging like the rain, bodies close in the dim chaos. I waded to the ladder, slick with wet, intending to patch from above, but the rung slipped under my grip, feet sliding on the mud-slick metal. The storm stripped everything, guards, distance, leaving just the raw push to save what we'd built. Her hand caught my arm then, steadying me mid-step, palm firm against my bicep through the soaked sleeve. Warmth cut the chill sharp, her fingers digging in to hold me up, breath coming quick beside me as thunder rolled low. I paused, ladder creaking, her touch grounding more than the wood, the proximity electric in the flood's roar. We climbed together after that, me leading, her below passing the sealant bucket, water streaming down our faces, mixing salt and grit. Touches multiplied in the frenzy, her shoulder against my back on the narrow rungs, hands brushing wet as I took the tool, the heat of her cutting through the cold like a spark in damp tinder. No time for pullback, just the shared rush, hearts thudding syncopated over the gale. Up top, the roof slanted treacherous, shingles loose under the onslaught. I smeared the patch quick, fingers numb, but the wind tore at the tarp, nearly yanking it free. Mara reached past, her body pressing close to weight it down, hip to hip, the rain masking the flush rising in me. Adrenaline peeled layers, her reserve cracking in the strain, voice breaking as she yelled directions. "There! Seal the edge!" The closeness amplified the farm's weight, isolation turning the barn into a world of two, desires flickering unbidden like lightning on the ridge. We worked the leak down, water slowing to drips, but the damage lingered. Hay ruined, the structure tested raw. As the patch held, we descended slow, ladder groaning, her hand lingering on my elbow at the bottom, steadying against the sway. The air inside hung thick, rain drumming relentless, our breaths ragged in the pause. She wiped her face with a sleeve, eyes meeting mine direct, the guard slipping further. "This place," she said, voice low over the downpour, leaning against a post slick with wet. "It's all I have left after she left." The confession hung, hint of loneliness cracking through. Partner's departure years back, couldn't take the wind's endless push or the quiet that swallowed everything. Said the farm isolated me, turned me hard. Walked out one morning, no word since. Her fingers flexed on the wood, calluses pale in the dim, the admission stripping more than the rain. Vulnerability raw as the flooded floor. I nodded, throat tight, the echo of my own losses stirring. Women who'd faded under stares or silences, leaving me to drift. The storm's fury mirrored it, pulling truths to the surface, her eyes holding mine unflinching, the warmth from her hands still ghosting my skin. Desires pressed closer, unspoken but alive in the shared wet, the adrenaline fading to a hum that bound us tighter. We gathered what tools we could salvage, mud caking our boots, but the flood had changed things. Failures escalating beyond wood to the heart of her alone. Thunder peaked then, wind howling peaks that shook the walls, forcing us out. "House," Mara said, grabbing my sleeve, her grip urgent as we dashed across the yard. Rain lashed horizontal, blurring the path, the main house a faint light ahead. We stumbled through the door, soaked to bone, the shelter pulling us in as the gale raged on outside. The door slammed behind us, cutting the wind's roar to a muffled howl. Water pooled at our feet on the worn floorboards, the house's warmth a shock against our chilled skin. Mara flicked on the lantern by the entry, its yellow glow spilling soft across the room, catching the drips from our hair and clothes. We stood there, silhouettes dripping, shirts clinging translucent, breaths coming in ragged pulls that fogged the air. My jeans hung heavy, mud streaking my legs, and I shivered, the cold sinking deeper than the rain. Her eyes met mine brief, dark and direct, before she turned away, grabbing towels from a hook by the kitchen door. I shifted, wincing as pain flared sharp in my ankle. The dash across the yard had twisted it on a slick route, the fall hidden in the blur, but now it throbbed, swelling under the boot. Twisted it, I muttered, leaning against the wall, but Mara was already there, kneeling quick, her hand steady on my calf. She unlaced the boot slow, fingers firm through the wet leather, peeling it off with care that cut the ache. The skin beneath bruised purple, tender under her touch, and she pressed light, testing the give, her palm warm against the chill. "Not broken," she said, voice low over the rain's drum on the roof, but her gaze lingered on the mark, concern etching her face in the lantern's flicker. She wrapped it tight with a strip from the towel, knots sure from years of mending fences and rains, the pressure grounding me more than the words. The air hung thick between us, her closeness pulling after the storm's strip. She stood slow, hands still hovering near my arm, the glow catching beads of water on her neck, tracing down to the collar of her shirt. Exhaustion weighed us both, bodies heavy from the flood's fight. But the touch lingered in my skin, her fingers' firmness echoing the warmth that had steadied me on the ladder. No rush to pull back, just the shared drip of rain from our forms, the house's quiet, amplifying the pull. I caught her scent then, earth and faint soap under the wet, mixing with my own sweat and mud, desires stirring low, like roots in thawed soil. "You need to dry off," she said finally, practical words masking the edge in her voice, turning toward the hall. "Can't work tomorrow soaked like this." She led the way to the bathroom, door creaking open to reveal the small space, steam already hinting from the hot water she'd flicked on earlier. The lantern followed, casting shadows on the tiled floor, the shower's hum low and inviting. "Use my shower," she added, handing me a clean towel, her eyes flicking away quick, but not before I saw the hitch. The offer crossing the line we'd held, practical but laced with the day's closeness. "Wash off the day's grime. I'll get dry clothes." I hesitated in the doorway, steam curling warm around my legs, the air thickening fast with the scent of soap and heated tile. My hand gripped the frame, ankle pulsing, but it was more. The intimacy of her space, the vulnerability in accepting after the touches and confessions. Her bathroom felt personal, shelf with her razor, faint trace of her in the mirror's fog, the boundaries we'd kept through work blurring sharp. What did it mean, stepping in, letting the water strip the mud and reserve? Desires pressed closer, her offer hanging like the steam, pulling at the thread between us. I nodded slow, throat tight, and stepped inside, the door clicking soft behind me. The water hit hot, scalding the chill from my bones, rivulets tracing paths down my back as I stood under the spray. Mud swirled at my feet, the day's strain easing in the heat, but my mind stayed on her. Hands firm on my skin, the confession of loss echoing in the quiet. I lathered quick, soap slick and clean, the steam filling my lungs. But the hesitation lingered, what came after this shared warmth. Towel rough against my skin as I dried, pulling on the clothes she'd left. Loose shirt, soft from wear, pants rolled at the cuffs. The fabric holding her faint warmth, like an extension of the touch. Out in the hall, the house settled quieter, rain easing to a patter. Mara sat at the kitchen table, changed into dry flannel, lantern low between us as she poured tea from a thermos. The mug warmed my palms, steam rising slow, and our eyes met over the rim, the post-shower quiet wrapping us close. No words at first, just the shared exhale, boundaries blurring in the warmth, her foot brushing mine accidental under the table, lingering a beat. The storm's peak had passed outside, but inside the pull deepened, vulnerabilities surfacing soft in the hush, pulling us toward dawn's fragile light. The lantern's glow held steady at first, tea steaming between us on the table. But then the power flickered, bulbs in the hall buzzing faint before dying to black. Outside, the storm hadn't eased like I thought. Thunder grumbled low, rolling closer, wind picking up again with a whine that rattled the windows. Mara stood quick, her chair scraping wood, eyes on the dark yard. "The barn," she said, voice tight, grabbing the lantern as rain lashed harder against the panes. I followed, ankle throbbing but ignored, the warmth from the shower fading fast in the chill draft. We dashed back across the slick ground, mud sucking at our boots, the house light swallowed by night. The barn door banged open, wind shoving us inside, and the lantern swung wild, casting shadows that danced like ghosts on the walls. Water dripped from the eaves, but worse, the patch we'd sealed earlier had failed under the gale's push, a deeper flaw revealing itself in the main beam. Rot hid there, black and soft from years of damp, the wood sagging further now, cracks spidering out like veins under strain. The structure groaned, a low creak underscoring the thunder's boom, threatening to give if we didn't brace it tonight. Adrenaline surged again, cold mixing with the earlier heat, as we grabbed what tools we could, hammer, nails, spare lumber from the corner. I climbed the ladder in the dim, lantern hooked on a rung below, Mara's light steady but shaking faint in her grip. Thunder cracked sharp overhead, vibrating through the rungs, the emotional rawness hitting like the rain, our shared warmth from the house stripped bare by this crisis, isolation pressing us closer in the chaos. I wedged a brace against the flaw, muscles burning as I drove nails home, each swing thudding against the roar, sweat beating cold on my neck. The beam shifted once, dust sifting down, and my heart slammed. The farm's fate hanging on these strikes, her life threaded through the wood. Mara climbed halfway, passing boards up, her free hand gripping the ladder tight. "Hold it there," she called, voice breaking over the wind, but the reserve cracked fully then, words spilling as thunder rolled again. She paused, lantern tilting, light catching the strain in her face, eyes wide, jaw set but trembling. "This farm's all I've got left," she whispered, the words raw, barely audible under the gale. After she left, I poured everything in. Nights mending fences alone, days fighting the wind to keep the stock fed. But the loans pile, the land dries out, and if this barn goes... Her voice trailed, cracking like the beam, fears of the future pouring out. The isolation turning to loss, no one to share the load. The quiet swallowing her whole if the place folded. Vulnerability hung there, thunder echoing the break in her guard, her hands shaking as she handed the next board. I reached down then, my touch grounding her, palm over hers on the rung, fingers lacing, rough and sure, calluses meeting in the dim light. Warmth cut the storm's chill, her pulse thudding against mine, the contact a steady anchor amid the rawness. She leaned into it, breath hitching, eyes meeting mine unflinching in the lantern's flicker, the emotional peak binding us tighter than any brace. No words needed, just the shared hold, thunder underscoring the pull, desires and fears surfacing full, her reserve yielded in that grasp. I drove the final nail, the thud solid, beam holding now against the groan, our hands linked below like roots in earth. The storm peaked one last time, wind howling fierce before easing slow, rain softening to patter on the roof. We descended careful, ladder creaking its relief, the lantern's glow steadier as thunder retreated distant. Back in the house, dawn's gray hint crept through the windows, bringing fragile resolution. The flaw shored, but the night's truths lingering, pulling us toward morning's light. Dawn's light filtered gray through the kitchen window, the storm's remnants dripping from the eaves like last breaths. I woke on the couch, ankle wrapped tight, the house quiet except for the faint creak of floorboards. Mara moved in the kitchen, coffee pot hissing low on the stove, her back to me as she poured 2 mugs. Steam curled up, carrying the bitter earth scent that cut the damp. We sat at the table, mugs between us, her fingers brushing mine when she passed the sugar. The touch lingered, calluses scraping soft, eyes meeting over the rim. Lingering glances that held the night's rawness, no rush to pull away. Cleanup started slow outside, the yard slick with mud, debris scattered like broken promises. I limped beside her, gathering fallen branches, her arm steady in mine when the ground sucked at my boot. "Stay longer," she said then, voice low over the crunch of gravel, eyes on the horizon where clouds thinned. "The barn needs more, and this. Her hand squeezed my elbow, the decision hanging simple, but weighted. The pull to extend the job, to face the world's judgments together. Whispers from townfolk, family stares that boxed loves like this. The isolation here a shield, but fragile against mainland eyes. I nodded, throat tight, the resolve settling like packed earth. Staying meant building against those pressures. Her farm, our ground. No drifting now. We walked the farm's edge after, boots tracing the fence line where wire hummed faint in the breeze. The ridge rose sharp ahead, fields rolling out under clearing sky. Love's weight steady like the land itself, unyielding, drawing you in deep. Her shoulder bumped mine deliberate, warmth bridging the chill, and we paused at the draw, wind tugging our hair. The quiet here's home, she murmured, gaze on the valley. But sharing it changes the sound. Vulnerabilities affirmed in the step, her hand finding mine loose, fingers lacing as we turned back. No grand words, just the grip tightening on a loose post, me handing her the pliers without ask. Simple acts rooting us deeper, roots twisting through soil, holding against gusts. Afternoons wove the routine tighter, me planing new boards while she hauled feed, shadows overlapping in the yard. Evenings brought her to the outbuilding door, thermos in hand, the shared sips pulling stories loose. Her partner's walkout echoing my old fractures, but now mended in the telling. The air hummed with it. Boundaries dissolved in touches that lasted, her thumb tracing my palm over coffee, affirming the cracks we'd bared. Isolation shifted. No longer a weight, but a space to grow bold. The farm's pulse syncing with ours. The horizon cleared full by dusk, sun slanting gold across the ridge, pulling us toward the ongoing thread. Days stacking like braces. Connection weathering steady. Hands linked tight against the wind's last push, we stood on the porch, the farm stretching solid behind us. If you've felt this quiet pull of shared truths, share your story below. Subscribe for more tales of finding roots in the rough.